which I need to show you before we finish up the class, is select by location. It was the other method. Remember, I told you there are two smart selections. Now, the other method we can use, in order to use that, close the parcels and go to buildings and turn on elevation all layer. So turn off everything except building and elevation all, right? So then you would just see a bunch of elevation points and just building footprints, right?
Yeah.
So let's assume I want to choose from the elevation points, and it looks like the elevations are sort of scattered around, like it almost feels like each building has an elevation that shows the roof elevation, and also there are elevations on the ground itself, right? If you look at it carefully, zoomed in, you would see that some elevation points refer to buildings, some just refer to general land, right? So what happens if I want to choose all the elevations that are building roof elevations, or I want to choose all the elevations that are the terrain elevations, right? If I want to isolate one of each, right? So this is when you need to use a select by location features, because I can't really use select by attribute, because if I go and look at the attribute table for the elevations, it doesn't tell me if an elevation point is specific to terrain or roof. If I had a field in here that said, let's say, elevation type, and it would have said roof or terrain, then I could have done it that way, right? But just by looking at the elevation values, it will be very hard to decide if it is a roof or if it is a terrain elevation, right? Obviously, if the elevation is less than 10 feet, it means it's a terrain elevation. But hey, I mean, New York is not flat. There might be terrain elevation that says 30, 40 feet, or it might just be a building elevation right by the waterfront. So what I do is, again, just watch me on this one, is I go to selection and I say select by location this time. So it's more or less a similar menu as the select by attributes, right? But this time, I would use a different string to do the selection. Again, the first thing is select features from which layer. It's asking me which layer I want to do the selection. So I want to choose elevation points, right?
Guys, can you guys listen in? Or
so I will just say I'm doing my selection based on elevation all, which are my elevation points. And then it's asking me a source layer, which means the layer that I'm going to use to make the selection. So it's not the selection itself, but it's the second layer that would describe the selection in the first layer, right? Does it make sense? So that should be buildings in this case, because what I'm trying to say to the computer that if an elevation point is inside a building polygon, select it for me. Because that's my logic. I'm thinking and I'm saying, okay, if the elevation point is on a building, it means it's a building elevation. And geometrically, how could I let computer know that it's a building elevation? I can say, if the point falls in the boundary of the object, right? So I need to say buildings, and then now I need to choose the special selection method for target layers features. So if you look at this one in your own time, you would see that there's actually a lot of different selection methods inside this, depending on the geometries. I can say, are within a distance of the source layer feature, are completely inside it, are within it, are identical, share a line segment. Now, remember, GIS is used for a lot of things. The reason it gives you a wide range of things is that, let's assume you're doing an infrastructure project and you're changing a pipeline underneath a road, and you want to understand which houses will be affected, right? You're changing a water pipe. So you can just select the line and say, choose all the buildings that are 50 feet away from this. So what it will do is it will create an imaginary buffer of 50 feet and include everything to that, right? It's a more advanced selection, but it will save you a lot of time and effort if you do a complicated project. Now, our one is not that complicated. We know we just need to say are within the source layer feature, because basically if our points are within the source layer, which is building, it means we want them selected. So I just click are within the source layer feature and I say okay. What it will do is it will create me a selection and it will only choose the points that are inside the buildings. Does it make sense? Yes. Sorry? Which one I used to select? Okay. It was select by location. My target layer was elevational. Yeah, the last one is are within the source layer feature. But keep in mind, that's not the always definite answer. For this problem, it worked, right? Not every problem or every selection could be used this specific method. You need to think about it. You need to look at your geometries and then decide which one best suits your interests. And don't worry about it. It's usually a trial and error. Like I even need to do complex selections from time to time. I choose one of them and then it doesn't really work. I say, okay, let me try to choose with the other one. Maybe it will create a better selection, right? So explore these in your own time. Like look at them and see what it does in means of selection. Okay, so this was another method to do the selection. I'm not gonna export this because we're running out of time, so I wanna go a little as quickly as possible, but this is another way to select and isolate or trim geometry, right? Okay, now, what also we can do is represent things based on their attribute tables as well. So don't follow me, but just follow me on the screen. If I turn on my parcels, remember we like added colors to the map. My only concern is this doesn't really tell me anything. If I can color this map based on the information that I have, it might even be better, right? Right now, all my parcels are gray. In your case, it might just be blue, yellow, whatever default color you select. So I know that there's a lot of information exists, right? What happens if I can color things based on that information? Which is very easy to do in GIS. So all I need to do is, if I click the parcel, I can only assign it one color, remember? It doesn't give me an option. So I need to go a little bit deep, right-click it, and then rather than looking at the attribute table from this menu, I go all the way down to properties. This is called layer property window. This is where more or less everything happens. So I have a bunch of tabs. Quickly just to let you know, general would just give you the tab's name, and then you can customize certain layers and say, show only these layers in certain zoom levels, which we don't really use, but if you're using a very high map, like a high scale map, like remember on your phones, when you look at Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever you use, when you zoom in, you start to see more and more detail. Like obviously when you look at it in city scale, it doesn't show you the buildings. The moment you start to zoom in, you would see more and more things. So that's how it is configured. You can say, show the buildings after this zoom level, and then don't show them before this zoom level. So source is where the file is on your drive, and then it will show you the projection and the coordinate systems. Display is where you control the transparency of a layer. So layers could be transparent if you want. You can assign different levels of transparency. And then the most important tab is called symbology. So symbology is where you can change how things get visualized. Now by default, it's a single symbol. So if you click it, you would get to the same thing as you would have clicked this little rectangle, right? But let's try different things. So we can try a category or a quantity, or even more, but I'll show you a category and quantity today. So what is a category? A category is basically an information that is categorized in different teams, right? What could be a category? Just make a wild guess. What could be a category of city information? Yeah, zoning could be a category, exactly. Land use could be another one. Because for something to be part of a category, it needs to fall under different kinds of categories, right? So for zoning, it might be commercial zoning, or whatever it is, C blah, blah, blah.
Or
it could be residential. Yeah.
Elevation, for example.
Exactly, or elevation. So anything that will fall underneath a category would fall into here, right? So let's try to make one quick dumb map. So I say unique values, and the value field, it's asking, again, GIS, remember, is a software that you ask questions, it answers. So each time you need to refine your question. So we said, show me a map based on categories, and it already, as you would have seen, showed me a sample of what a category map would look like. Now it's asking me, what is my value field? What am I categorizing? So let me go and find the land use, for example, because we already are familiar with it. So I click land use, nothing appeared. It just still waits for me to input. I need to say add all values. This will add all the land use values that exist in this map, right? Where it reads the data, it reads it from the attribute table. So it went through and analyzed all the 1,000 entries in the attribute table, and it's telling me I have 211 of O1, 313 of O2, whatever those mean. And remember, we have those meanings from our PDF file, the metadata. So I will go to my metadata, my PDF on the side, and look at the categories. So it looks like O1, O2, and O3 are all residentials. They're either one family or multifamily, walk-up or elevator. Now, I don't need that kind of information. I'm just interested in if it is residential or not. Let me zoom in so you can see it. Oops, sorry. So what I can do is O1, O2, and O3 may mean the same thing for me. I don't need that much of delineation in the information. I know O4 is mixed residential and commercial, O5 is commercial and office, O6 is industrial, and then it goes on. So let me go back to GIS. So I have O1, O2, and O3. What I can do is I can assign O1, O2, and O3 all yellow color that would represent the residential. Or, just to make it easier, rather than doing it one by one, I may hold Shift and select O1, O2, and O3 all together, right-click and say Group Values, and I can categorize them under one category. You know, I can just go through and make them one by one. It will be the same thing. This will just make your life easier. And if you ever need more information, you can right-click and say Ungroup. Okay? Does it make sense? All right. So O4, I know O4 was mixed use. I'll just go on and assign it an orange. O5 was commercial and office, so I'll just assign a red. And then I think O6 was industrial and manufacturing, so let me go do that one as well. And let me just do like a pink or maybe sort of like a magenta or like a violet color. I'll just say, okay, we can do the rest of the map, but just to buy time, I'm not gonna do the rest. I'll just say, okay, and then I will see a colorful map. So basically, it's giving up me a land use map. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
All right, so quickly, this one was a category map, right? So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a different map using the same data, and I'm gonna keep this map. What I'm going to do is I'm gonna go to add data again, and add my parcels again, and see my second copy of parcels is again empty. Remember I told you when it saves, it will only save the workspace. Like if I had saved this document even, and open the parcels again, I won't see the land use. Why? Because land use is not part of the information layer, it's part of my map. For temporary purposes, or for only this session, on this map, the first copy of my parcels layer, I assigned land use colors. But the second copy of the layer, I didn't assign anything yet. Think in this as external reference in AutoCAD. You have two copies of the same external reference. One of them is scaled down to this side. The other one is scaled up to this size. So they're the same object, but they're represented differently. So it's the same thing, right? So what I do
because
is...
the layers on top of the one parcel is on top of the other parcel layer, it hides that.
Exactly. So basically, the moment I turn off the second parcel layer, I still see my land use. It didn't go anywhere. It's just underneath it.
Yeah.
So for the second one, I'm going to go to right-click and go to Properties and Symbology again. This time I'm going to do quantities. Now, what is a quantity versus the category is that in certain cases, categorization may be too hard. For example, let's do a map based on the year these buildings are built. It will be too hard to assign one color to every year, right? Because probably within this region, we have buildings from, let's say, 1905. But I can't assign just one by one colors to each building. I mean, what I can do, it will be easier, is to maybe assign one color to each decade or each 20 years, which is a range, right? So in information, a quantity basically refers to a range of things, right? Rather than a single number. Now, land use was a single number, it's definite. The land use is mixed use, O4, residential, 1, 2, or 3, whatever. It's like open space, 6 or 7. But the year built is like every polygon has their own number, and it's hard to categorize, so we put it in ranges. So I selected quantities. It's asking me what is the value again, the first thing. Remember in the other one we selected land use. Now for this one, I'll go and find year built. So I'll click the year built. As you would see, because it's a range, it automatically populated for me. So what it did is it gave me 5 different ranges. It gave the year zero as one range. Now, obviously, there are no buildings in New York City that is built in year zero. So year zero means there's no data that's collected for that building, which is a good thing, because if there's no data for a specific site, it lets us know. So we could say, okay, there's no data collected for this site. And then it categorized every building from year 1 to 1871, 1871 to 1912. It just gave a random break. What we can always do is change the number of classes. Let's say I want to do it in 10 classes, right? And we can go to classify, and we can manually distribute how we want it. Now, there are automated ways to do it as well. If you're a little familiar with arithmetics, what you can do is you can do an equal interval. So then what it will do is it will divide the 2,000 years into 10, and it will do an interval every 200 years, which wouldn't make sense. Almost all the buildings would fall into the last one. Mm-hmm. Or you could do, an equal interval, a defined interval, medians, natural breaks, whatever is you want to. But usually none of these are used because they're usually very scientific for our kind of analysis. What we do is we define the break values by ourselves. Again, it depends on what story you want to tell. If you want to say, I want to show all the buildings that are built before 1950 in this area to show that this area is very historic and this and that, then you may, use your breakpoints according to that. In this case, just to make it fair, I will just use almost like decades. So I'll just manually type the years. And then maybe after a while, I will just skip the decades, and then I'll go to like 20, 30 years. So I'll just leave it like this. So it's decades and then like 30 years on a couple of them. I'll just say okay. And then I can always choose a different color map, right? So in this case, by default, it chose me the yellow to brown, but I have different options to choose. But I think this one is okay for a year. So I'll just say okay. And then now I have a different map. So this map is called a heat-based map. And you would see this kind of map a lot in the web, in the news. When you see, for example, election results, when you see poll results, you would always see that the maps go from, one color of the party to the other color of the party, and then depending on how much or how lower the percentages are, it will go from, darker blue to lighter blue, or lighter red to darker red. So it's more or less the same logic, same kind of analysis. Again, it's called heat-based map. Any questions?
If you were going to do this as an elevation, for elevations, for example.
Yeah, we could do that for elevations as well.
Good question. What is it showing again?
What is it showing?
Yeah, what?
Year built. The year the buildings are built.
So if I'm seeing correctly, this lot is built a long time then.
Yes.
The lightest is
the lightest is the long time.
Is the oldest.
This is where we are.
Yeah. So it's built in probably somewhere between 1970 to 1980. And what you can do for specific questions like that is that there's this identity tool, just like in CAD inquiry. You can click that and just click it to that. What it will show you is it will show only the attribute table for that single polygon. So you can go and query and see like when exactly it's built. So the year built would be towards the end, maybe? Year altered, year 1971, see? So again, you can all customize this. If you want something to come out, let's say for year 0, for example, we don't want probably yellow for year 0, so you click it and you make it, let's say, a gray, because year 0 probably means there's no information. Maybe because there's no buildings on it. Maybe it's just, public property, nobody bothered to, write the year for it. And now let's say you're interested in 1951 to 1970 buildings. What you can do is you can break the color scheme and just put an accent color in between. So it will, again, think of the map and the visualization as a story. Whatever you need to tell, whatever it needs to show, right? Does it make sense? Okay, any questions regarding this? We need to wrap up pretty quickly. So let me show you now 2 very easy ways to export this information to other stuff, right? So the first medium you can always export from GIS directly is to Illustrator as an AI file or as a PDF file. Now the good thing is that because this is all vector information, right? I'm gonna just turn on the roads layer as well, and then click the roads and maybe make them sort of like very light gray, so there's something like a real map. What you can do is you can create a page layout from this map, which is very easy to do, and then export it to Illustrator. And in Illustrator, everything would be vector again, so you can choose and change the colors, change the text, change the outline width. So usually what we do is in GIS, we do the first touch, and then we export it to Illustrator, and then you can refine and add more colors or add more features to the map. Does it make sense? So just like AutoCAD, GIS has a sort of like a modeling space that we were using, the map space, and it also has a paper space which is called layout view. So this is the small icon underneath your screen that switches to a layout view, and the moment you switch to a layout view, you would see that it's on a page. To modify the page, you can always go to File, Page and Print Setup, and change the size of the page, right? If you usually use like a PDF printer by default, it will give you more page options. It's more flexible. Before you print it, always print it as a PDF. It's much safer than to directly print it. So I'll just print this into a PDF, and I'll just use a tabloid size. So I'll just say OK, and see it updated the page. So what you can do is you can drag this so it covers the entire page. Pretty intuitive. And then the first thing you need to decide is scale. You know, what scale you want to print this. You could either decide it by zooming in and say, I want to print this extent, or you can see the scale toolbar on your GIS by default. You can say, I want to print a map that is 1/2000 in scale. Again, this scale is right now a default metric scale. You can always go and customize this list, and you can switch to architectural scales as well. So let's say you want to print in 1 inch equals 100 feet, whatever you want to. Pretty intuitive. And the good thing is you always know the scale. And there's even a way to put that scale into the page as well, so which is good. The moment you're set with your scale, let's assume we don't want a regular scale like this, but we would do a custom scale. Let's assume I don't really care about the scale, but what I care is that it shows this map extent. Let's say I'm pretty happy with my extent. You need to save the extent. So accidentally, if you move or change the scale, so you can come back to that scale again, right? What you do is you go to bookmarks and you just say create bookmark. I'll just name it as 1.